friends, and welcome to Cait Casts On. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin, and I'm a knitter, spinner, sewist, and sometimes quilter based out of the Pacific Northwest. Today I have a little bit of a different episode for you. I thought that I would do a little bit of a tour of all of my self-drafted knitting projects. I was kind of taking a little bit of a step back and looking at all of my knits as I transitioned things in and out of my wardrobe as we change into warmer weather. And I was just realizing kind of how many projects I have made for myself over the years from scratch. And I feel like I have some thoughts I want to share. So grab your craft of choice, settle in, and we'll get into it. Don't get me wrong, I love pre-made knitting patterns. There are so many talented designers out there and so many options to choose from. Pre-made patterns are the majority of what I spend my time knitting. But I do think there's something really wonderful and empowering in creating your own self-drafted knits for your wardrobe. I think it really allows you to kind of step back and look at and embrace the process of making. Knitting is one of those mediums where it's so forgiving. It's so low risk, because if it's not coming out how you thought it would, or you don't like the fit of it, or you made a mistake, all you have to do is rip back and you can reuse your material, which I feel like is pretty rare for most mediums. So I feel like it's even more of a reason to kind of take a chance, be a little bit experimental, embrace the process, because worst case scenario, you frog back a little bit. It's a little bit of time spent doing something that you have to redo, but it's also time spent knitting, so it can't be that bad. It has been about 2.5 years since I self-drafted my first garment project, and in the time since, I have found that I really enjoy the process of kind of stepping back and approaching knitting from a different angle. One of my goals for 2026 is to just self-draft more pieces. I didn't put like a hard number on it, but I do want to engage in that practice a little bit more this year. And so far I'm on track. But I thought that I would kind of start at the beginning, where I first started playing around with even just the idea of self-drafting, and kind of move through all of the things that I have made over the years. I hope it provides you just a little bit of inspiration, whether you haven't ever self-drafted before but are kind of curious about it. I think that there are a lot of ways to kind of dip your toe into self-drafting without necessarily starting from 100% scratch. So I'm going to share some of those with you. But also, if you have, self-drafted before, maybe this will just kind of give you some ideas on new projects that you could create, or new kind of techniques that you could draw inspiration from. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start with the very first thing that I semi-self-drafted, and that is a pair of socks. I personally think socks are a fantastic place to start self-drafting. I think a lot of the stitch counts for sock patterns are pretty standardized, so it's really easy to take something like a vanilla sock pattern. There's plenty of free ones out there, as well as paid. But then kind of plug and play your own ideas on knit textures, or even like lace charts if you wanted to, on top of the blank canvas of a vanilla sock. That way you don't necessarily need to worry too much about gauge or stitch counts, or kind of grading something for your size, because you already have kind of a good starting place with which to work on top of. So this is a pretty simple pair of 2x2 rib DK weight socks that I made for my husband. And this is just a really simple example of kind of plugging in your own stitch pattern. It does not need to be complicated. And I did use a free sock pattern as like the base for this design. I believe it was the DK Weight Socks by Crazy Sock Lady. I'm pretty sure that's what it was called. And it was just a free pattern. And then I used 2 strands of Long Dog Yarns merino sock in the color Army of the Dead from Brandy's Lord of the Rings collection a few years ago. I'm not sure if the sock base that Brandy uses is still the same as this, but it was, I believe, an 80-20 mix of merino and nylon. Anyway, I held the yarns double, and so it really created a very soft color change that I think is really nice. And the rib specifically I wanted to do because I really enjoy a rib sock. It really forms nicely around your foot. The bottom of the sock is still stockinette, and then it uses pretty much the instructions exactly from the DK weight rib socks pattern, just with a 2x2 rib put on top. So like I said, it's not necessarily fully self-drafting by any means, but it is a really good way to kind of dip your toe into the process. It can be something as simple as a 2x2 rib, or you can play around and do something a little bit more complex, but it's just a really good opportunity to just kind of start playing around with the idea of doing something from scratch. I liked this enough that I repeated it in a sock for myself pretty recently. It's a really well-fitting sock. It's a classic, and I really enjoyed it. In this version, I did change up a little bit. I kept the 2x2 rib in the length of my heel flap versus in this one, I did it in stockinette. But otherwise, I pretty much followed the same formula. It was really simple. It's just a nice way to start thinking about your knitting in a little bit of a different way. Like I said, by no means is this fully self-drafted, but I do think it's a really good place to start. If you want to start experimenting with things but are feeling a little bit, nervous about the math and stuff, this is a really great place to start. And it just kind of gets your creative muscles working in a little bit of a different way, which is really, really fun. The next project that I'm going to share with you is what I would consider my very first fully self-drafted project. I swatched for it like 4 times. I was very intentional about my yarn choice. I did all of the math. I, considered all of the design details. And this is kind of the result of that project. This is what I call my slalom sweater. It's a pretty simple drop shoulder sweater pattern with 2x2 rib details and just a nice, simple color work motif that I thought was really, really beautiful. I was very inspired for this sweater by the contrasting yarn color that I chose. The main color is Barocco Ultra Wool DK in the color Snow, and then the contrast color is Spin Cycle Yarns Versus in the color Hot Mess. I'm not sure that they make the Versus yarn anymore. It's not a, traditional like color changing spin cycle yarn, but it is just 2 plies that are different colors throughout the entire skein of yarn. And so this one has blue and red in it. And so from far away, it kind of looks like a reddish purple, but when you get up close, it has a lot of cool color details. When I kind of sat down and envisioned this project, it was really driven by the desire to kind of step back and embrace the process of writing my own knitting design. It never turned into a pattern, and that wasn't necessarily the point for me. I just kind of wanted to approach my knitting from a different angle. I had been knitting, I think, for about 4 years at this point, and I felt like I had all the practical knits that I needed in my closet. And at that point, I was knitting because I enjoyed the process. I found it very inspiring, and it's always fun to add some new clothes to your closet. But I was okay if a project took a little bit longer, or if I made mistakes and needed to rip back. I didn't feel this urgency so much anymore. And so I decided I wanted to try and design something for myself. Generally speaking, I am pretty proud of how this sweater turned out. I feel like it holds up for the most part. There's definitely a few things I would change about it, which I can get into in a second. But for it being a first attempt, I feel like it's pretty solid. I didn't necessarily look up a ton of like resources, tutorials, or anything like that when I started doing this. Because I had been knitting for a few years at that point, I felt like I pretty intuitively understood the relationship between gauge and like the desired measurements that you want in a garment. But I did look at some of the knits that I had made previously, some of my store-bought knits, took measurements of the pieces that I felt like I really liked the fit of, and then took my gauge and like tried to make this gauge fit those measurements. And I feel like it worked out pretty well. It was pretty seamless. One way I did kind of keep the training wheels on a little bit for this project was I referenced other drop shoulder sweater patterns that I already had in my knitting pattern library. I paid attention to how they did back shaping, how they did neck shaping, how they kind of brought things together in the front, things like that, just to kind of get an idea on maybe best practices for getting those shaping details right. And that was really, really helpful. No regrets there at all. I think actually that's a really good way to kind of learn by observation, see how other people are doing things, and to get the shaping that you want and learn from that. Especially when I had already knit those sweaters and I knew that, oh, I really like how this sweater fits me around this part of my neck, or I really like how this sweater fits in my waist, things like that. I think, we can kind of learn what our preferences are. The one thing in this sweater that I wish that maybe I considered and did a little bit differently is the arm edge here, where the body color work goes into the sleeve. There is a little bit of pulling and bunching that I just don't think is necessarily the best looking thing. And I think I should have probably spent a little bit more time maybe addressing ways to solve that. I did notice it was happening when I did it, and I just kind of said, it's fine, I'll just let it happen. I thought maybe picking up for the sleeves would kind of hide some of that, but I think that there's actually a pretty easy solution to fix that, that I would implement now if I was doing it again. But that's just how it goes. You learn through experience, and if anything, this specific problem that I noticed really inspired my next self-drafted project and some solutions that I implemented in that so that this wasn't an issue. So yeah, I think, we learn as we go, and sometimes the mistakes can, inspire us to do our next project too. But that is my slalom sweater. A few years later, I feel like this has really stood up. I'm really proud of it. And it has a lot of memories attached to it, a lot of problem solving things that I worked through that I'm really, really proud of. So yeah, for those reasons, and just like it being my very first self-drafted piece, this will always have a place in my closet. The next project that I self-drafted is honestly a huge step up in terms of complexity. It's one of the most complex things I've ever made, regardless of whether it's from a pattern or self-drafted. And the fact that it was my second self-drafted piece, I'm still pretty impressed by. It's one of my favorite things in my closet and one that I'm just so, so proud of. And this is my Comet cardigan. It's going to be a little bit tricky to share because it is large. It is a very large, oversized cardigan, kind of with 3/4 sleeves, and it uses a lace pattern all over. So it's very, very drapey and silky. I knit this using Malabrigo Cicero, and this is the color Sandbank. This project was a huge labor of love from the process of kind of figuring out gauge and measurements, making charts, and then actually knitting the thing took quite some time. But I feel like it was so, so worth it. It's one of my most worn summer knits. It's just a really nice lightweight cardigan to throw over a tank top or a tee and wear with some shorts for the summer. It's really, really nice. And when you look at the stitch pattern, you might recognize it because I did not design this pattern from scratch, this lace chart specifically. This is Sari Nordland's Poet chart, which I bought several of her Poet patterns actually, and got the chart from there. And decided that I kind of wanted to take this really, really lovely chart that I love the look of. I loved the process of knitting in her patterns, and I wanted to take it and turn it into a different kind of garment. So that was kind of the challenge there. I had previously knit the Comma Cocoon by Anne Wenzel. That is also one of my most worn knits. I absolutely love it. It's this big, oversized, open cardigan with 3/4 sleeves. And I basically decided that I wanted to meld these two patterns together. So that was kind of the initial vision that I had, and I just kind of had to figure out how to make the two meet up. So my first step in this entire process was to pick out a yarn. I chose Malabrigo Cicero because it was available at my local yarn store in a quantity that I thought I needed. It was obviously kind of a rough guesstimate in terms of how much yarn I needed, but I felt like I was going to be covered with the amount that they had in stock there. And then I needed to take some measurements from the Comma Cocoon, figure out the fit of it, how big the back is, how big each of the front panels are, how long the whole thing is, all of that stuff. Then I went ahead and did a gauge swatch. Actually, the gauge swatch sits right back here on my little swatch board. And I just kind of picked a needle size that I thought would create the fabric that I wanted, which was pretty flowy and open. I ended up using a US 6 or 4mm needle for this. I took a note of kind of how many stitches and rows were in each inch or 4 inches of fabric, and then figured out how many stitches I would need to get the measurements I wanted. And then I took the Poet chart and kind of plugged in some increases, made sure that everything looked nice and smooth there. And yeah, just kind of got everything to make sense for the shaping of my garment. I did take some inspiration as well from the shaping of the kama cocoon because I really liked the way that fit. I did make some changes based on things that, you know, I felt like I could do a little bit differently to get either a little bit of a cleaner look or just like a design that I felt I liked a little bit more. But generally, like the construction that I followed for this was similar to the construction for the kama cocoon. So yeah, just another kind of way to use a little bit of training wheels to kind of figure out how to construct something. You can see here where the arm and the body join. I kind of learned a lesson from my last sweater and created a little bit of a panel to kind of help the transition there feel a little bit more intentional. Because yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of pulling and gapping when you have either color work or lace or cables. There's always going to be a little bit of movement in the side of your fabric. So I really learned my lesson from the last project and figured out how to create a little bit more of an intentional transition piece. And I'm really quite proud of that. There was a little bit of a challenge when designing this piece, kind of trying to find a balance between getting things to the measurements that I wanted or as close to the measurements I wanted as possible, while also making sure that the stitch charts matched up. That was true for the sleeves here. I wanted to make sure everything was seamless and that the chart matched up perfectly, so that had to be a pretty specific number. And then also under the arm between the front and back panels, I wanted it to be seamless there as well. And so I did have to make a little bit of compromise on the measurements just to make sure that everything matched up appropriately. Now, if measurements were the most important thing and I wasn't as concerned about the stitch charts perfectly matching up, there are some solutions to that. Like I could have added little transition sections like this under the arm and on the side of the body. But I really didn't want that. I decided that the stitch chart was the most important thing to me. And so that was kind of what I prioritized over measurements to an extent. But this was a really, really fun project to kind of put all the pieces together, figure out how the puzzle clicks together in the way that makes the most sense and kind of lets all of the different aspects of it shine and come together in the right way. I would consider this a 100%, you know, fully self-drafted piece, even though I used a stitch chart from another pattern, even though I used kind of target measurements from another pattern, and like general construction process. I really had to step back and figure out how to make all of those things come together in a very specific way and how to kind of have some elegant solutions to some challenges that I was facing because of the elements that I was throwing in there. Truly, this is a piece that I'm just like so incredibly proud of. There are definitely lessons that I learned from this as well. I don't know that I would use Malabrigo Cicero for something like this again in the future. It is a single ply yarn, so there is some wear and tear on the high friction areas of this that I don't think it looks bad. Like this has been now 2 years or almost 2 years since I've made this. I've never depilled or done anything to it. It doesn't look bad, truly. But like when I get up close, I can see some wear and tear. And I do wonder how many years this is going to be like structurally sound. I do see this potentially, you know, not lasting my entire life, which would be a bummer. But I think, you know, you learn lessons along the way, and there's definitely some things that I think I could improve on in this. Again, this is actually one project that I would love to knit again and change up some pretty significant aspects of it. I'll talk about that more towards the end of the video, but I could definitely see this becoming a full-blown pattern and design, obviously with a different stitch chart, not using Sari's Poet chart. But this was just such a fun project. It really got my creative muscles working. And I think it's a really good example of what a vision, like an initial idea, and then like lots and lots of patience can get you. After I finished that cardigan design, I felt like I had really been bit by the self-drafting bug. I was really, really enjoying the process of it. And so I actually went right into another self-drafting project immediately afterwards. And this is what I call my cottage camisole. By the standard of my last project, this one was pretty simple, but it has some details in it that I'm really, really proud of. I think in terms of kind of independently thinking of my own construction and measurements and kind of clever ways of tackling certain problems, I do feel like this is my best self-drafting work. I feel like it's pretty flawless in terms of how I solve certain problems, the fit I got, like the shaping I wanted. It's all exactly what I wanted. And I felt like I did it really independently. Like I didn't reference other patterns at all. So for that reason, I'm very proud of this one. I feel like it's a really good and clever solution to a lot of the ideas that I wanted to get. I knit this using Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino in the color Oatmeal. And it's a pretty simple kind of V-neck tank top with ribbing and actually a faux button band here. I don't know if you could tell if it was faux, but it's faux. I knit this tank top fully in the round and then used an I-cord that I applied at the end to kind of mimic a button band, and then sewed buttons on top, and I feel like it looks pretty realistic. I also added a tiny little baby split hem here in the front to kind of reinforce like the faux button band look. And I felt like that was a pretty clever solution to that. So I'm really, really proud of that detail. I think that really was, it solved a few problems for me. First, that I wanted to knit the whole thing in the round. That's just like my preference. Things go a little bit faster for me when I knit in the round. I was actually looking at my project page on Ravelry for this. I knit this in 10 days. So that's pretty impressive for like a fingering weight tank top. Let's see what needle size I used. Yeah, okay. I used a 3mm or a US 2.5 for the bulk, like the body details. I did use a US 1 or 2.25mm for the I-cord details along all the edges. But yeah, for like a 3mm needle project fingering weight, that feels pretty impressive, 10 days. I clearly enjoyed the process and had a lot of fun. Being able to knit in the round definitely contributed to me being able to knit it that quickly. And I think, yeah, I was just really inspired by kind of some of the problem solving that I got to do during this project. So yeah, knitting in the round was a huge motivator for me in terms of like why I wanted to do the faux button band, but it also had to do with the fact that I didn't want any gaping to happen along the front buttons. This is a negative ease garment, and so it's going to kind of stretch a little bit. Like the ribbing, I wanted it to kind of be a little bit tighter. And so I didn't want any gaping to happen with the button band. And you can solve that by like sewing it up afterwards. But if I was going to that effort, I figured that I would just kind of give the faux button band a try. I think before I even cast this project on, I tested out my faux button band idea on a swatch. I think that is kind of really crucial when you're doing self-drafted projects. Take time to swatch. Take time to think about, you know, what problems am I going to encounter? And instead of trying to fix them on the scale of a full project, just get out a swatch and try it out and see if it works. So that's my number one tip when it comes to self-drafting and kind of solving problems in your knitting in general, is just swatch, swatch, swatch. It's a great tool to have in your arsenal. This is also one of the projects that I feel like I could see turning into a pattern eventually. With all of my self-drafted projects, I take very thorough notes and basically write out a pattern for myself so that I can reknit it. I just don't obviously grade it for other sizes when I do that. That's basically the piece that's missing, and the instructions are a little bit more shorthand in terms of what I'll understand. But I could definitely see turning this into a pattern someday. It's a really fun project. I feel like in terms of like a summer garment tank top, this really checks a lot of the boxes that I personally want in a tank top, in a summer garment, in a summer knit. The straps are like decently thin, but at least for me, they perfectly cover my bra straps. This is a bra-friendly top, which is great. And I really like the design of it. I feel like it's really cute and flowy and goes with a lot of different things. And I can definitely see myself knitting more of these in other colors. That's kind of the one thing that I regret about this project is the color. I was kind of going through a beige phase. Like I said, I knit these back to back. They're very similar colors. And I was going through a neutrals phase. I would love to knit this up in like a light green or even like a red. I think a white would be beautiful. There's just, I feel like I could use this in other colors a little bit more. So yeah, maybe I will knit another version of this summer. Maybe I'll turn it into a pattern eventually. I also feel like it's been really important for me personally that when I'm self-drafting these pieces, I'm not thinking about turning them into patterns. I'm thinking about making something that I like, that solves my problems and my desires. And like, if it stops there, that's totally fine. It's been 2 years since I made this, and I'm just now thinking I could turn that into a pattern. But like, that was never like the goal or intention. And for me, that has been really helpful in terms of kind of preserving my joy and not feeling too overwhelmed in the process. The next 2 garments that I want to share are not fully self-drafted. They are what I would call semi-self-drafted. But I wanted to share them in this list because I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about knitting patterns. And again, dipping your toe into doing something a little bit different, embracing the process from a little bit of a different angle, doing some of your math and things like that. And so yeah, I wanted to share them anyway. This one is a Sailor Swift top by Kudovikika. And I would say this stays true to the Sailor Swift top. All I did in this one was I changed gauge and needle size. I sized down my needle pretty significantly and yeah, and just changed the gauge that it was worked on. I did that primarily because I felt like the white yarn was too see-through at the recommended gauge, and this was kind of my solution to that. But I think changing gauge and otherwise knitting to a pattern is just a really fun way to, again, like just switch the way that you're thinking about your knitting, and to add a little bit more intention and like thought behind it. If you're feeling like you kind of want to solve a puzzle, this is a good way to do it. So basically what I did was I swatched again at my needle size that I wanted to do. I made sure that I liked the fabric that I was getting, counted how many stitches were per inch and how many rows were per inch, and then took the measurements from the Sailor Swift pattern. I can't remember if this pattern has a schematic or not that I was able to pull from, or if I just like reverse engineered measurements based on the pattern and the gauge that was recommended. Regardless, I just figured out how many stitches I needed to cast on in order to get the measurement that I was supposed to get, how many rows I needed to do in order to get the length that I was supposed to get, and went from there. And yeah, it's still very true to the Sailor Swift top, but I was able to get a fabric that I liked a lot more. I did actually knit a version of this for my mom. I don't have it anymore because she has it. But that version steps a little bit more in the direction of self-drafting. It's like one step further, I would say. The gauge is the same as this version, so it's a different gauge. I had to do all new math for it. But I also changed up a few design details in the process. I did not do the stripes as intended. The entire garment is kind of a fade of colors. So there's 4 colors, I think, in the whole thing. And it kind of slowly fades from one color to another, to another, to another throughout the whole length of the garment. And then I also added in some different waist shaping. I added some increases in the waist to give it more of an A-line look. And also I added a split hem and did some different finishings on the ribbing, I think, as well. So this one I would for sure say is a Sailor Swift top. That one, I don't know. I think it's kind of ambiguous. I think you could make the argument that it is still a Sailor Swift top, and I think you could make the argument that it's not anymore. But I think it is still really interesting to kind of play around with a design and get it to a point where it's kind of its own thing, following a lot of the instructions and the measurements, but then kind of changing up some details as you go. I think that that's another example of how you can kind of start thinking about your knitting a little bit differently and work your way up to potentially designing from scratch if you wanted to. And then the last garment, again, I would say is semi-self-drafted, but in a different way than the Sailor Swift top was. This is what I call my Azaway sweater. Kind of a weird name, but it is a combination of 2 different pattern names, and that's why I named it that. I actually have a full knitting vlog about this, kind of taking you along for the ride as I actually knit this up. kind of the problems that I encountered, the solutions I wanted to implement, things like that. If you're curious, I'll leave that linked. This is primarily made from like 2 different patterns, kind of like 1.5 patterns. It is mostly knit to the gauge and instructions of the Azor sweater, or the Azor sweater, by Orlaine Souche or Tête Bêche. I absolutely love that pattern. I have a version in my closet already that is just like knit exactly to pattern. I absolutely love the fit of that garment. And I wanted to kind of design my own color work to replace the color work that's written in the pattern, just to get a little bit of a different looking sweater. So I did design this color work chart myself, kind of from scratch and kind of not. That's where the half pattern comes in. I took a lot of inspiration from one of the sweaters in this book. This is Echoes by Susan Crawford, and specifically the Dalloway sweater. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. This is kind of what I primarily took inspiration from. I really love this color work, and I just wanted to create motifs that felt similar and reflective to it. So the stitch counts had to totally change. I wanted to get as close as I could to the stitch counts intended in the Azor pattern. They're not exactly the same, but they're as close as I could get them. And I wanted to create a motif that felt reflective of the Dalloway. I really liked that color work, and I wanted to create something similar to that. So that's kind of where it's like 1.5 patterns. The math in this pattern, I followed it exactly. The gauge is the same. I did not change gauge at all. I did change, obviously, the color work, and I changed all the finishings. This is half twisted rib that I did. I also did a double folded collar, and I did half twisted rib on all the hems, which is not what is in the pattern. And then I also added a little bit of color work to the sleeves. That is also not in the pattern. So again, I feel like this is just a good example of ways that you can start thinking outside the box without necessarily starting from scratch. You can change gauge, you can rework math, or you can just kind of play around with the numbers that are given to you and figure out, you know, different designs to put on top. So just a really fun example of a way to start thinking that way. Then we are up to 2026 now. One of my goals, like I said, for this year is to self-draft more. So that has been in the back of my mind throughout this year. I have a list of projects that I want to design from scratch, and I have 2 that I have either finished or started that I can talk about now. So the very first one is a pair of socks. These are what I call my fable socks. This is actually going to be my very first published knitting pattern. The pattern is already all written up. It's all graded. The charts are written. And I'm going to be opening it up for testers, I think, in like a week and change from when this video goes live. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, this is the Fable socks. It's a really fun little pointelle lace motif alongside some ribbing details that I feel like just give it a really fun look while also being a very well-fitting sock. I love ribbing in a sock. I'm kind of at a point now with my sock knitting where if it doesn't have ribbing, there's like a pretty solid chance I'm not going to knit it, because I just really enjoy the way a ribbed sock fits on my foot. It feels very practical and well-fitting. So this was the very first sock that I knit and pair of socks that I knit for this pattern. This is to fit my foot. So it has a few customizations. I do a shorter gusset than most people do. I kind of customize that because I have a shallower foot, but otherwise it is just kind of a standard sock. This is a 64 stitch. And then while I was knitting the pattern, I also knit 2 other versions of the sock just to show examples of what they would look like graded to different sizes. I have 5 sizes total in this pattern that range from 48 stitches all the way up to 80 stitches. But the 56 and the 72 stitch sock have slightly different charts. So I wanted to knit some samples of that. These are just single socks. I did not knit a second sock for these guys because they're just for some photos and for some examples. But this is the 52 stitch sock version. These also have not been fully wet blocked yet. I just steam blocked them. And this is the 72 stitch version. It was really important to me that I wanted to kind of keep the same spirit of the original design, but I wanted to be able to grade them to other sizes too. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the charts for the kind of the in-between sizes and trying to figure out how to creatively solve some grading problems that I was running up into. But I'm really, really happy with the solutions that I came up with. I feel like they're pretty elegant solutions. I feel like it looks very, very similar to the 64 stitch stock and absolutely stays true to the spirit of the design. So I'm really proud of these. I'm glad that I kind of got that figured out. But that was the first time that I ever had to figure out grading. I'm grateful that it was just like a sock pattern. I feel like that was easier for me to wrap my head around. But yeah, this is the first self-drafted thing that I have done, like fully self-drafted, in 2026. And I'm really, really happy with how it came together. I feel like with this one, I was very intentional about like every little design detail. Even in this very first version, when I wasn't necessarily thinking about turning it into a pattern at all, I was just making a pair of socks for myself. I really spent a lot of time thinking about every little detail and trying to do things very intentionally in a way that felt very purposeful. And I'm really happy with how all the details came together. And I feel like that intentionality really informed how I did these ones too, once I did decide to make a pattern out of it. So I think that that's kind of a good philosophy. Like, I always start my self-drafted pieces designing for myself. Like, that's rule number one. And rule number two, I feel like, is to just take your time and think about the details and learn from your past projects. But just like, don't necessarily take any aspect of the project for granted, because it's an opportunity for you to really just make something totally perfect for you. Like, there's no constraints. You get to decide what you want. And I think there's something really special about that. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with the Fable socks. If you enjoy knitting socks and enjoy knitting socks from patterns, stay tuned because this one's coming soon. But since finishing my Fable socks, I have also started a brand new self-drafted project. This is still a work in progress. It's still on the needles. But this project was really, really inspired by this yarn. This is some Handspun. This was actually my last Handspun that I did in 2025. And I am so proud of this yarn. I wanted to make sure that I did something really, really special with it. This is 80% merino, 20% silk. I did a 2-ply spin, and it's a fractal spin. So it's color changing, but it's theoretically color changing in a pretty like consistent, predictable way, and like nice, even way. And I also got down to a lace weight yarn, which I didn't necessarily have that as a goal when I was spinning this. It's just kind of how it ended up. And I did consider knitting from a pattern. For this project, I actually had a shawl pattern picked out that I thought would be really pretty. But when it came down to it, I just, with my 2026 goal in mind of wanting to self-draft more, I thought, you know what, this is a really good opportunity for me to exercise that muscle. And so that is when I started developing and casting on this project. Because it's hand spun, I have like an estimate of my yardage, but obviously it's not like super exact. So I wanted to do a shawl that was knit from end to end. So right now I'm doing increases along one side. And then when I hit about like 50% of this weight of yarn, I will start doing decreases along the same side. And yeah, that way it's really easy to know when my halfway point is, to use up as much of the yarn as possible, but also to not necessarily need to worry about running out of yarn. So yeah, this is kind of the progress that I have on it. It has not been blocked yet, as you could probably tell as I held it up. So I do have my swatch here to share with you as well. But this is a really, really lovely lace pattern with some seed stitch details that I thought suited this yarn really well. The name of the fiber color was Leaf Collecting. And so I thought doing something kind of with a leaf lace shape sounded really, really nice. I wanted something that had the leaf shape, but also wasn't so complex that like it competed with the color changing, because you can see as the shawl gets wider, the color changes start happening more frequently. You can actually see that here too. In the beginning, when it's kind of skinny, the color changes happen more slowly. And as I get wider and wider, the color changes will happen more frequently. So I wanted something that complemented those colors and felt nice, but wasn't so loud that it was competing with it. And I feel like this is a really, really good solution. I needed to obviously design a lace chart, and I wanted to do something kind of from scratch, something that felt original, so that if I wanted to kind of create another big oversized wrap like I did earlier with Sari's Poet chart, like maybe I could turn this lace pattern into one of those wraps and like actually make it fully original and my design. And so I pulled out my big stack of stitch dictionaries. I have, let's see, I have 3 stitch dictionaries that are specifically for color work that I pull inspiration from those. And then I have 2 of these Japanese knit stitch Bibles that I can pull for cables and lace. You can see I have a lot of things flagged in these books on things that I feel like are really good starting points and are really inspiring to me. For this one specifically, I pulled from the 250 Japanese knit stitches. I looked at the open work patterns that they have, and I found one that I felt like had the right like leaf shape, good like movement there. But I did change quite a bit about the chart. The chart in the book here doesn't have any seed stitch or anything like that. So I did make some customizations based on what I know that I like in terms of look and in the process of knitting. I really like knitting seed stitch. And so I did make some customizations to it, but that was a really good starting place for me and kind of helped it feel a lot less daunting. So if you have ever thought about, you know, self-drafting like a cabled or a lace or a color work a garment, but like the idea of coming up with a lace chart or a cable chart or like certain color work motifs intimidates you, stitch dictionaries like this are really, really helpful as good starting places. You don't necessarily need to take them, you know, 100% from the book. You can have some creativity and rethink some things if you want. You can also just knit them straight from the book. They're beautiful, but they're just a really great starting point to kind of, you know, get some ideas going in your head and think about things that you would change. So if you're interested in these resources that I use for self-drafting, I'll give a quick list of what the books I have are. These are not all of the stitch dictionaries or things like this by any means, but these are the ones I have and like. 250 Japanese knitting stitches, the original pattern Bible by Hitomi Shida. 260 exquisite patterns by Hitomi Shida, the Japanese knitting stitch Bible. Between these two, these are not the same charts. They're different. So if you're curious about that, there's not, at least from what I can tell, there's not repeats across the books. And then for color work, I have Alice Starmore's charts for color work knitting, new and expanded edition. I have 200 Fair Isle Motifs Knitter's Directory by Mary Jane Mucklestone. This one is out of print, but you can still find it at used bookstores. I got mine from Powell's. They had it in stock not that long ago. And then I also have Alternate, a Stitch Dictionary, 200 Modern Knitting Motifs. This specific book is definitely a lot more modern and contemporary in terms of the motifs it has compared to Alice Starmore's and Mary Jane Mucklestone's. So depending on what you're looking for, there's definitely some different styles between the 3 of these books. But yeah, those are some really great books to add to your library if you have wanted to start self-drafting lace, cables, or color work. They're just a really great way to get your ideas flowing. So that's all I have to share with you today. It was really fun for me to kind of step back and look at all of the things that I have self-drafted or semi-self-drafted or just kind of stepped outside of the comfort zone of a pattern and kind of involve myself a little bit more in the process of knitting. It's always really fun when I get to do that, and I really, really enjoy it. So I'm excited to do more of that this year. I hope you're walking away from this, you know, a little bit inspired, or if nothing else, I hope you feel empowered. Knitting is a really, really incredible skill when you step back and think about it. The fact that we can turn a piece of string into a functional and beautiful garment is like mind-blowing and incredible. And regardless of whether or not you knit from patterns or you self-draft or you do both, that's just a really, really wonderful thing. So I hope you walk away feeling like empowered and like you can do really incredible things, because you can. I hope you had a nice time sitting down and chatting with me and that you found a lot of joy in whatever you've been working on during this time. You can always come over and say hi to me on Instagram or Ravelry. My username is CaitCasts and both of those are linked in the description below. Definitely stay tuned for the Fable Socks test call if you're curious and wanting to apply to that. I will be putting that information out on Instagram and also here on YouTube. So stay tuned. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Like, leave a comment. Those things really help me out, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.